Welcome to this next video in a series of videos from Boat Companion. This week we'll be talking about the survey process and the importance of the survey. Now, it's very important when you appoint a surveyor that you understand what level of survey you are going to have carried out, and that the surveyor also understands what that level of survey is. Now, there are two main types of survey. There is the hull and equipment survey, and then there is an engine survey. Now, if it's a sailing yacht, for instance, where the engine is a relatively minor part of the overall cost of the boat, then you may go with a surveyor that looks at the hull of the boat, the rigging of the boat, and also has a look at the engine. However, if the engine forms a very large part of the value of the overall boat, so if it's a power boat with, say, a 200 horsepower engine, where the engine is probably worth a third of the value of the boat, then it's very important that a full engineer's survey is done on the engine to ensure that that engine doesn't have any major defects that could come back and cause problems at a later date. So communication with the surveyor as to the type of survey that is being carried out is extremely important to ensure that you spend your money in the most efficient way to get the parts of the boat looked at that you need to get looked at. For instance, if you have a relatively new boat that's only maybe a couple of years old, you may have to put less emphasis on the hull because perhaps it's still under factory warranty, but then you might want to spend a little bit more money looking at the engine, so you might have a full engine survey carried out. The boat may have been abused in some way, it may have taken in silt at some point, which could cause parts of the engine or the cooling water to stop flowing through the engine, which could damage the engine. So, it doesn't matter how old the boat is, the engine can have been damaged, even if it's not had many hours spent in operation. So it's well worth having a full engine survey carried out if it's a power boat where the engine forms a large value of the boat. However, if it's an older boat, say 10 years plus, you may want to put more emphasis on the hull of the boat. Basically, the engine is going to have a certain amount of wear and tear on it because it's a 10-year-old engine, and you've got to accept that if you're buying an older boat. But the hull of a boat that age has probably been through a lot more bumps and perhaps some groundings out, and also it may have an osmosis problem. And osmosis is where the moisture content in the hull gets high, and it starts to drive out the solvents in the hull, which then cause blistering of the surface of the hull and breakdown of the laminate, which can actually be a long-term problem for the boat, which is quite costly to repair. So it's an older boat, very, very important to have a full hull survey done. And with an older sailing boat, obviously it's very important to have a look at the rigging as well. A lot of insurance companies will not insure a boat if the rigging is older than 10 years old. So they'll exempt that from the insurance policy. So it's a good idea to ask the surveyor to give you an idea of the quality of the rigging and the age of the rigging to ensure that it's of a decent quality. The surveyor can also look at the sails, make sure there's no rips in the sails, give you an idea of the quality of the sails. Older sails tend to stretch and you get a much more baggy sail, which is a lot less efficient. So if the boat is being sold with exceptionally good sails and you get the sails out and they're not very good, then that's an opportunity to negotiate price. Now, one of the great things about a survey, whether it's an engine survey or whether it's a hull survey or whether it's a hull and equipment survey, is that you can normally negotiate the price of the boat down after that survey based on the things that have been found, especially if it's an older boat. 90% of the time things will be found, and you can use those findings to agree a reduction in the price of the boat, which normally covers the price of the survey that has been carried out. It also gives you the opportunity, if something very serious is found, to actually step away from that purchase and gain a refund back for your deposit that you've paid as part of the contract process that we discussed last week. Now, one of the questions that often comes up is, when is a situation too serious for you to continue with the purchase of that boat? Now, one way of looking at this is obviously if the boat's lifted out of the water, it's got a massive crack in the bottom that you didn't know about, and the boat's a real mess, and obviously that's quite obvious. But the problem arises when you've got a problem that can be rectified, but it's going to cost a lot of money to rectify. So a good measure, and a measure that's put forward by the RYA, is that if the value of repairing something is more than 5% of the value of the cost of the boat, then that's a large enough reason to be able to call off the purchase and take a refund of the deposit that was paid when the contract was originally signed. If you're buying a boat from a broker, you will often see that the broker has listed out all of the items that boat has. Whether it's a chart plotter, or it's the horsepower of the engine, or if it's the number of berths, or any special equipment that the boat may have aboard. It's a good idea to get the surveyor just to check that all that equipment is actually there, and that it's actually functioning as it's supposed to be functioning. You'll also see that the boat type will be named in the advert, and it seems obvious, but it's also important to ensure that that particular boat type is checked to make sure it is the type of boat that's actually in the advert. Quite often with an older boat you won't actually see anywhere on the boat where it says what the boat actually is. It's also important to check that boat was factory finished and that it wasn't home finished. That's not to say that home finished boats shouldn't be purchased, but you do need to look a lot more carefully when it's a home finished boat, because obviously that boat potentially will not have the same quality of finish that a factory finished boat would have. So that's all very, very important. The other thing is, on the day of the survey, you will be able to speak to the surveyor if you can actually be at the survey, and they'll be able to give you an idea of the quality of the boat and the problems that have arisen out of that boat survey straight away. So it's a very good idea to attend. And then within a couple of weeks, or hopefully a week within the survey being carried out, you will get a copy of a full written report of that survey. And then, based on the contract that we discussed last week, you then have 14 days to decide what your next, 14 days from the survey, what your next step is going to be in the purchase process. It's very important also that you check the qualifications of the surveyor. Now, a surveyor also should hold professional indemnity insurance. Now, if the surveyor holds professional indemnity insurance and then they miss something on the survey, then you actually have recourse to reclaim those monies from the professional surveyor. If they don't have professional indemnity insurance, it's going to be very difficult to reclaim that money. So check that they have the professional indemnity insurance before appointing a surveyor. It's also very important to assess what their qualifications are. It may be that if they have been in the business for a long, long time, they don't have any qualifications, but their experience more than makes up for that. And if they have the professional indemnity insurance in place, then that's fine. There are other qualifications. There's professional bodies such as the Royal Institution of Naval Architects or the Institution of Marine Engineers. The YBDSA insists on all its surveyors carrying full professional indemnity insurance and being qualified. So you can see whether they are members of the YBDSA. So many things to look at. What we're going to do now is look at what's actually carried out in the survey process, and we'll show some images of the equipment and the tools that are used. It's important to note that Boat Companion is not a yacht surveyor. However, we can put you in contact with very good surveyors and manage the survey process from start to finish. Now, one of the first tools that you'll find in the equipment bag of the surveyor is the moisture meter. Now, the moisture meter is extremely important because it looks at the ingress of water into the hull. Now, if it's an older boat, then this is even more important, as ingress of water into the hull could mean that there is osmosis, which could result in delamination of the GRP in the boat, which reduces the structural strength of the boat and can cause long-term problems. Now, osmosis can be treated, but it's a relatively expensive thing to do, so it's very important that these things are found early on. Also, if there's any cracks in the GRP, or if there is even chips to the laminate surface, the gel coat, then you could have water ingress. Water ingress can cause delamination and de-strengthening of the hull, so it's very important that moisture readings are taken. Another important tool held by the surveyor is the hammer. Now, a hammer is a very simple device, but basically what you do is you go around the hull, tapping the hull all over to ensure that it has a solid, nice ring to the hull. If there is a dull thud, again, this can demonstrate there is a problem with the laminate in the GRP, and that the laminate is potentially coming apart. You may find this in areas where, again, there is chips to the laminate surface, to the gel coat, or if there is a minor crack. So it's important that the hammer test is done all the way around the boat. Now, something you can see here is where there has been a chip to the gel coat in this picture, and you can see that the gel coat has started to pull away, exposing the glass reinforced plastic underneath. Water's got in there, so if that hammer was tapped on the surface of that particular area of the boat, you'd hear a dull thud. Now, you'll probably see that visually, but some of these things you can't actually see anything from the surface, but when the hammer is tapped, you will hear that there is a serious hollowness to the sound, which can indicate a serious problem, especially if these sort of hollow sounds are found around winches, where winches are embedded into the boat, because it could be that that area is a very weak area, and you could have a problem where the entire winch is pulled out of the deck of the boat if it's a bad enough problem. Another item obviously carried by the surveyor is his eyes. Now, most big problems with a boat are visual. You can see that there is a problem. This particular boat here, you can see that there is a significant amount of damage to the front of the boat. However, that's potentially below the waterline, and if that was not letting water in, although to be truthful, I think with that particular amount of damage you would be letting water in, but it demonstrates that lifting a boat out of the water is extremely important to see what is occurring below the water line. It may look like an exceptionally good boat from above, but from below, there could be problems. The next thing we're looking at here is an engine survey. As we've discussed, it's very important to have an engine survey carried out, especially if the engine forms a large proportion of the value of the boat. If it's a simple outboard and you just want a very sort of brief overview of what the quality of the engine is, a normal surveyor will be able to do that. But if it's an inboard engine, high value inboard engine, high specification inboard engine, it's best to get a specific engineer's report carried out on that engine. Other things that the surveyor will look at are anodes. Now, anodes are located in various places around the boat, and they help to reduce corrosion. Basically, the anode corrodes rather than other metal parts on the boat. So you need to ensure that all the anodes are in good condition, that they have a decent amount of corrosion left in them, so that you don't have to lift the boat out of the water to replace the anodes again in the future. Now, anodes are especially important on parts of the engine and the propeller, where corrosion could cause a serious problem. There are other high value items on the boat. All need to be checked to ensure that they are functioning correctly. Now, the winches are a potentially expensive item that, if it turns out are damaged beyond repair, could be an expensive item to replace in the future. It's also very important with winches to ensure that they are embedded properly and solidly into the hull of the boat, and to ensure that there is no delamination around the winch, which could cause that winch to fail dramatically in the future, which would be a very, very expensive thing to replace. The surveyor will also look at the electronics in the boat. They'll make sure that all of the anchor lights, the steaming light, the bilge pump, all the various electronics on the boat are working as they should be working. And if any of these electronics are not working, they need to be rectified by the person selling the boat before you hand over your final sum of money, or you can use that as a reason to negotiate a reduction in the value of the boat. Now, I think we've covered most of the things to bear in mind when having a survey carried out on the boat. I just want to reiterate how important it is to have a survey carried out. Otherwise, you could end up like this chap in the picture here, where his rigging has failed, he's lost his mast. You don't want that happening out at sea. A very, very dramatic thing to happen, a very scary thing to happen, and a very dangerous thing to happen. So ensure that you have a survey done, ensure that you use a good surveyor, and that the survey is comprehensive, and ensure that you communicate what you require from that survey to the surveyor in a very clear manner. Now, I hope that you can join us next week for the next in this series of videos from Boat Companion, where we will be discussing the training that is recommended for sailing different kinds of boats in different areas and different distances offshore, where you can find that training,